Yes, and I think we have another program that's probably on past episodes that deals more specifically with that. But certainly, anytime someone is not a citizen, there are special planning considerations that we have to go into. And you want to make sure that you're talking to someone who understands non-citizen issues in their planning, because the generic planning doesn't cover that.
Right. So another issue that you mentioned briefly, but maybe we can spend a little time talking about it now, is who should be the trustee?
So maybe the single most important issue in family harmony is who should be the trustee. Most of the time, clients pick one of their kids. Oftentimes, it's the oldest kid. Sometimes they go with the local kid. Absolutely do not go with the local kid who's living with you, right? If they're not financially independent, that is going to be a problem. You know, they don't have any incentive to try and move out of the house, to treat everyone fairly when they have their own issues. So when we're looking at who should be the trustee, if we're going to pick one of the kids, there's a number of things we look for. First thing we look for is they absolutely have to be honest and trustworthy. You have to believe that they are going to do what you've asked them to do. But even more important than that is everyone else in the family, all the other beneficiaries, have to believe that they're honest and trustworthy. Because if they can't believe what this person is saying, even if they give them an account and say, here's what I did with the money, if they don't trust that that account is correct, you're just asking for a lawsuit. And we see this over and over as people are grieving. They make decisions that they wouldn't otherwise make. They're angry, they're frustrated, and now we end up where they're hiring a lawyer to really figure out what's going on in this estate because they just don't believe it. You also, we ask people to name someone who balances their checkbook. And that's a pretty rare commodity nowadays, but you know, finding someone who dots their I's and crosses their T's will keep them from getting in trouble with their siblings. I mean, the de facto rule is that if you can't prove what you did with the money, everyone's going to assume that it went into your pocket. So you really have to make sure that that fiduciary is documenting everything they do, so they make sure that the kids can believe, the other beneficiaries can believe that yes, this is the actual account.
Okay.
And let me give you an example, Mike, just as well. We had a situation where mom came in and decided that the oldest son should be the trustee. In most circumstances, most attorneys would have said, fine, son trustee, created documents, and it would have been done, right? If you're doing it yourself, you would have just listed son, no problem. But in talking to mom and finding out about the kids, it became apparent that the son was fine now because he was 6 months out of rehab.
Oops.
Right? and had a problem stealing money from the siblings.
Uh-oh.
So she believed he was fine, but the reality was that the kids were never going to trust him, and it was a disaster waiting to happen. And in talking to her and not wanting to use any other family members, we actually recommended a professional trustee so that the family members weren't going to fight over who had control, and you got professional management of everything. They did it quickly, they did it expeditiously, and they did it without a lot of argument.
So before I move on from this topic a little bit, it's just to point out, as you said, there are professional fiduciaries or trustees. Some of them are associated with banks. So Wells Fargo, for example, here we've got Bank of the West, and we just had a fellow from Fremont Bank talk to our estate planning council the other day, and it was, not all banks have them, but some banks do have trust companies. And then there are also now there's actually a professional fiduciary group. So these are usually former bank trust officers, or they may have other bankrupts. So may be CPAs, what have you, that they've decided to get into this area. And so there are these other choices. It does mean that your family's going to have to pay something, but you can get some more confidence that this person knows what they're doing and will carry out your plan.
And so you understand too, and so our audience understands, don't think that just because you name one of the kids that they're going to do this for free. Because in my experience, 80% of them want to get paid, and half of them want to get paid a lot. You know, so they look at this as a way to cash in. And they don't necessarily have any specific competence to do this compared to a professional.
But it's also time consuming. They deserve to be compensated.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think clients sometimes think that,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to save money
Yes.
by not using a professional. And the reality is, not only do you create conflict, you may create a lot of conflict depending on how much that person thinks they're entitled to. The other thing, it's a real word of caution, but never, ever, ever appoint a professional fiduciary without somebody else, maybe one of the family members, maybe it's the kids as a group, having the ability to remove that professional and replace them with another professional. You know, people come and go from institutions. Life happens, decisions get made or they don't. Communication happens or it doesn't. But if you're not getting the service you need, if you're not getting the results you need to have a system in place that allows that professional fiduciary to be fired and hire another one, because the court system is not going to remove a professional fiduciary unless they violate some sort of duty that they owe to you. And the ability to prove that is very expensive and very difficult to do. So it's much easier just to have what we call a trust protector in place who can help advocate for the family to make sure you're getting service out of those professional fiduciaries.
Okay. Time is going, so we may not cover everything, but I would like you to talk a little bit about choosing a guardian and what is a guardian.
So the single most important issue most of my clients face when they have minor children is who should be the guardian. That can be a very difficult thing, especially if they don't have family locally. So I want clients to think about two areas. One is the permanent guardian, you know, where that child's going to be raised and who's going to raise them and in what environment they're going to be raised. So, for example, we always nominate individuals. We don't nominate couples. If a couple is important, you say, well, to my brother John, if he's married to Mary. So you create a contingency there, and if he's no longer married to Mary, you don't have this family anymore, so maybe that means we go to the next person, right? The other contingency that we often would use is say, well, to my brother John, as long as he lives here in California or in the Bay Area, for example. But if he moves to Austin, Texas, then he's not we don't want him to be the guardian, because I'm not necessarily wanting my kids to grow up in Texas. We want to make sure that whoever that guardian is going to give the values that you want your children to grow up with. Do not appoint a guardian who doesn't share your values, because we can write in documents, the guardian has to make sure my child goes to church every week. But there's no way to really enforce that, and if the guardian isn't going, their child is not going to go to. That's just the reality of it.
Now, we've got a trustee and we've got a guardian. Should they be the same person?
No, do not let the trustee and the guardian be the same person. So we want to have some checks and balances here. And unfortunately, if you have the same person, then the guardian may decide that they need a new Porsche to take the child to soccer practice. And as the trustee, they have the checkbook, so they write the check, right? We had a situation where a guardian built a swimming pool in their backyard because the kids needed a place to swim. But when your child reaches the age of 18, they no longer need a guardian. They leave the house, but the swimming pool stays, and the property values go up for the house, right, the guardian's house, and they've taken your child's money to do it. So this money is the last legacy that you have for your children. We want to make sure it's spent on them. The other issue that we sometimes see is the guardian will take all of the family, all the kids to Disneyland and let your child pay for it.
Okay.
So by having separated duties, we make sure that the money is appropriately used for your child and not all sorts of extraneous uses.
Okay. So folks, we intentionally focused on issues here with the knowledge that, because we felt this is the most important thing. This is the starting point that you really need to focus in on and to know these things. So now we're going to try to hit some of the basic components of the plan, many of which that you've heard of before, but again, we want to cover. But Ray, just to let you know, we probably have about 4 minutes. So what are some of the basic components of the plan?
Well, first and fundamentally is a will, right? You have to have a will. There's special rules for how you create a will that are different from all the other documents, but that's the starting place. Now, in California, we usually have a trust, and the will says give everything to the trust, right? And the trust becomes the overall vehicle for how we pass property out or take care of ourselves when we're incapacitated. You're going to have a power of attorney for somebody who will manage the property when you're incapacitated. That should also be the trustee of your trust when you're incapacitated. And that covers things like your pets, your mail, but also covers assets that aren't in the trust, like your Social Security or dealing with government agencies and so on. Even more important than money, though, is your physical well-being. And so a healthcare directive is very important. You know, if you go to Kaiser, they're going to give you a yellow California Medical Association document. While that's adequate, it's really designed to protect Kaiser, not to protect you. So you want to make sure you get something in place, though, that specifies who makes decisions if you can't, and what kind of decisions you're looking for them to make. You also need a HIPAA release. We now have privacy for medical information. Nobody's going to tell your spouse, the doctors will not tell your spouse about your medical condition unless you give them permission to do so. Well, they're certainly not going to tell the kids. So we got to make sure that you get that information as well. Funeral arrangements, nomination of guardians, you know, passwords and digital information. There's just so much stuff that you want to be thinking about and talking about, your beneficiary designations and so on, that you really want to work with qualified professionals. And it's not just the attorney, it's your tax professional and your financial professional that make all the difference in whether your plan will succeed or fail.
All right. One thing that we haven't had a chance to really get into, but I just want to mention it again briefly because I think it's part of the survey and it's very important, and that is a funding mechanism. And so for many people, they don't have a lot of cash in the bank, what have you, and the way to create an instant estate is using life insurance.
Absolutely. In fact, you know, all the estate plans in the world aren't going to save you if you don't have any assets. So if you have responsibilities, you better make sure you get life insurance to create an estate, and then we can work with you on how to transfer that estate appropriately.
Right. So, like I said, folks, we have whole shows on many of these areas that we've talked about, but we just wanted to give you a bird's eye view, again, of estate planning, you know, to sort of give you a starting point, again, and understand what we're looking for and trying to help you and put your plan together. So, Ray, maybe you can just share a brief final thought, and then let's wrap this thing up.
Well, certainly in looking for an attorney, make sure you're looking for an attorney that counsels people, that's going to advise you on what you should do, what you can do, not just do what you tell them to do. Because ultimately, that's going to make the difference in whether your family still gets together every Thanksgiving or not.
Okay. Folks, we hope that you found this sort of enlightening and eye-opening, and again, get you thinking about this estate planning process. And then now you can make that appointment with your attorney and your advisors and get on with this process if you haven't already. We'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.